Sophie and Emma have been best friends for as long as they can remember. Sophie is happily married to Ben, a warm, charismatic man who has always gotten along well with Emma. The three of them, and often Ben's group of close friends, spend weekends together, laughing, partying, and making memories. Emma has always felt like one of the family, seamlessly blending into their lives. However, over time, an unexpected chemistry begins to grow between Ben and Emma. It starts subtly, with lingering eye contact and fleeting touches, but soon becomes an undeniable attraction that neither can ignore. One night, after an evening filled with drinks, laughter, and late-night confessions, they share a forbidden kiss, sending them both down a path that could shatter their closest relationships. Swearing to keep it a secret, they try to return to normal life, but when Ben's best friend discovers their secret, everything is suddenly at risk. Will Sophie and Emma's friendship survive this betrayal? And will Ben and Emma be able to protect their loved ones from the fallout? Or will they all lose everything they hold dear? Sophie and Emma's friendship had always been one of easy companionship, the kind that took no work, no strain, as if they had been born to be each other's closest friends. They met in college, becoming roommates by pure chance. From that first week, it was clear they were kindred spirits, spending hours talking about everything from their favorite music to their dreams for the future. Sophie's plans were always a bit more conservative and family-oriented. She dreamed of a stable career, a lovely home, and a devoted partner. Emma, meanwhile, was more free-spirited, wanting to travel, experience life fully, and take each day as it came. Despite their different perspectives, they found strength in their differences, balancing each other out. After college, their friendship didn't just survive, it thrived. Sophie met Ben in her final year, and they fell in love almost immediately. When they got married, Emma was Sophie's maid of honor, the two inseparable as ever. For Emma, seeing her best friend marry the man of her dreams was bittersweet, as it symbolized the end of their single days together. But she couldn't deny how happy she was for Sophie. Ben was perfect for her, reliable, charming, and loving. He treated Sophie like she was the only person in the world, and Emma respected him for that. In the years that followed, the three of them grew into a tight-knit trio, with Emma naturally integrating into Sophie and Ben's life. Whether it was joining them for a cozy night at their place, helping them with house projects, or being the honorary aunt to their pets, Emma felt like a real part of their family. They shared their joys, frustrations, and laughter in equal measure. Ben's easygoing nature meshed perfectly with Emma's sense of humor, and their inside jokes often left Sophie playfully rolling her eyes, as if her two favorite people were speaking a language only they understood. As Ben's friends joined the group, they too welcomed Emma with open arms. She often found herself as the life of the party, bringing out everyone's playful side and creating memorable moments for them all. For Sophie, nothing could be more perfect. She felt blessed that her husband and her best friend got along so well. It gave her a sense of security, knowing that the two most important people in her life respected and genuinely cared for each other. She never had a reason to worry. But over time, something shifted in the dynamic between Emma and Ben. It was nothing they could pinpoint exactly, not a moment or an incident, but a slow, burning awareness. At first, it was just a subtle spark, a whisper in their thoughts that they quickly pushed aside. After all, Ben was Sophie's husband, and Emma was Sophie's best friend. They both loved her deeply and would never do anything to hurt her. The unspoken rule, the line that had always existed, felt so clear that they barely even noticed it. But now, for some reason, the boundaries that had always kept them close yet appropriately separate started to feel strangely permeable. One evening at a gathering, they all sat around the fire pit, sharing stories and laughter. It was late, and the group was winding down, with only a few close friends left, Ben and Emma among them. Sophie had already gone inside, worn out from a busy day. Emma and Ben were sitting across from each other, sharing a drink. The glow from the fire cast flickering shadows over their faces, and they exchanged a glance that lingered a beat too long. It wasn't a look of intention or flirtation, but rather an unspoken acknowledgement that something had subtly changed. Neither of them spoke of it, yet it lingered. When Sophie came back out, they acted as if nothing had happened, but the feeling remained between them, a secret only they could feel. From that night onward, they both grew more aware of each other in a way they hadn't before. Ben noticed the little things about Emma, the way she threw her head back when she laughed, the way her eyes sparkled when she was deep in conversation, the way she always seemed to know exactly how to make everyone feel at ease. Emma, on the other hand, noticed Ben's quiet attentiveness, his thoughtfulness, and his calm demeanor that always seemed to balance out her more chaotic energy. As much as they tried to shake off this growing awareness, it clung to them, lurking in their minds and resurfacing at the most unexpected moments. During gatherings, they tried to keep their distance, but the pull was undeniable. Each shared joke felt like a private exchange. Every laugh seemed like a nod to an understanding they couldn't ignore. It was all very subtle, so much so that neither Sophie nor anyone else seemed to notice. After all, why would anyone question the friendship between a husband and his wife's best friend? They had been friends for years, and they'd spent countless hours together without a hint of anything untoward. The attraction that had started as a whisper in the background of their lives was growing louder, though neither would dare to admit it. Emma became more anxious around Ben, but she tried to play it off. She was determined to keep things the way they were, not willing to risk the years of friendship she had with Sophie or the trust she had built with Ben. But with every passing day, her resolve felt weaker. Every time she saw Ben laugh at one of her jokes, every time he shared a look with her that said he understood her in a way that most others didn't, the guilt and confusion inside her grew. Ben, too, was struggling. He loved Sophie deeply, and he hated that he was developing these feelings for Emma. He told himself that it was just a phase, an illusion created by familiarity and friendship. He convinced himself that things would go back to normal if he just kept his distance and stopped allowing himself to dwell on these thoughts. But despite their efforts, the tension between them was growing, and they both felt it. Emma and Ben's subtle connection deepened in ways neither could have foreseen. Weeks passed, each filled with stolen glances and unspoken words that felt dangerously close to secrets. Emma found herself both dreading and anticipating the gatherings at Sophie and Ben's house. Each evening was a test of restraint, a challenge to keep her emotions in check. She would often arrive, trying to maintain a calm, carefree demeanor, yet found herself feeling restless. Ben was the same. From across the room, he would catch Emma's eye, and just the briefest of looks was enough to convey everything they weren't saying. During one particular evening, Sophie invited a group of close friends for a game night at their place. The cozy warmth of the house, filled with laughter and friendly competition, only amplified Emma's unease. She had positioned herself near Sophie, trying to engage and be present. But every time Ben entered the room, her focus would splinter, her awareness of him growing until it was difficult to even think of anything else. It was as though the room shifted whenever he was there, and her laughter with Sophie or anyone else felt somehow hollow, overshadowed by her preoccupation with his presence. Ben, likewise, was fighting his own battle. He was seated across from Emma, a careful distance away, yet his attention seemed to constantly stray towards her. When it was his turn to make a move in the game, he looked up and their eyes met. Brief, but electric. His expression was unreadable, his face a carefully composed mask, but his eyes held something deeper, something unmistakable that seemed to pull her in despite her better judgment. Emma quickly glanced away, her heart racing, cheeks flushed as if caught in a private moment in the middle of a crowded room. Sophie, blissfully unaware, kept the energy of the night high, laughing and teasing, enjoying the company of her friends. To her, Emma and Ben's bond was a blessing, something she often boasted about to others. She would joke about how Ben and Emma were like siblings, or how Emma was practically part of the family. Her warmth and trust were so genuine, and Emma felt a pang of guilt every time Sophie expressed her gratitude for the friendship she shared with Ben. Sophie's ease was a stark contrast to the storm Emma felt churning inside her. Later that night, as people began to leave, Sophie was preoccupied saying goodbye to guests at the door. Emma found herself alone in the kitchen, loading dishes into the dishwasher. Ben walked in to grab some glasses, and suddenly they were alone, the quiet hum of the house settling into an intimate silence around them. Emma could feel his presence even before he spoke, a soft, "Hey," that seemed to hang in the air, charged with an unspoken intensity. She turned, and their eyes met in the low light of the kitchen, a moment stretching between them that seemed both thrilling and terrifying. "I just wanted to thank you for tonight," Ben said, his voice low. "I know it's silly, but these nights feel a little brighter with you here." Emma looked down, trying to hide the small smile tugging at her lips, knowing that this wasn't just a friendly exchange. She could feel her heart beating faster, every word they shared feeling like a step too close to an edge she wasn't supposed to cross. "You know I'd do anything for you both," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. The words held layers of meaning, ones she didn't dare to say aloud. A moment passed, heavy with what they both wanted to say but couldn't. They both knew this was dangerous, that they were skirting the line between friendship and something else entirely. Ben's hand brushed against hers as he reached for the glass, a fleeting touch that sent a surge of electricity through her. The contact, though brief, felt like a confession, like all the unspoken words between them condensed into a single, electrifying second. Both of them pulled away quickly, a mix of surprise and guilt flashing in their eyes. Sophie's laughter echoed from the entryway, bringing them abruptly back to reality, a sobering reminder of the trust they were both betraying by even allowing these moments to linger. They quickly composed themselves, but the awareness of each other remained, filling the room even after they left it. That night, Emma couldn't sleep. She lay in bed, replaying every glance, every accidental touch, wondering how they had reached this point. Over the following weeks, Emma and Ben's connection continued to grow, and it was becoming harder to keep it hidden. They had established an unspoken understanding to avoid being alone together, to keep things light and friendly when Sophie was around. But sometimes, despite their best efforts, they would find themselves lingering in each other's presence a bit too long, sharing small smiles that said more than words ever could. The chemistry between them was undeniable, and as much as they tried to ignore it, it only seemed to intensify with every passing day. Then came the night when Sophie invited everyone out for a celebration at a local bar. It was one of those perfect evenings, music playing, drinks flowing, and laughter filling the air. Emma danced, throwing herself into the rhythm, trying to drown out her emotions, to enjoy the night without overthinking every interaction. Ben watched her, captivated, his gaze lingering in a way that felt both familiar and forbidden. As the night wore on, their resolve crumbled. They exchanged looks across the room that carried a weight of inevitability, a silent acknowledgement that they were both fighting a losing battle. When Sophie was momentarily distracted, Ben made his way over to Emma, his expression unreadable but intense. They stood close, their proximity sending shivers through her as they leaned in to hear each other over the music. He didn't need to say anything. The look in his eyes said it all. There, in the dimly lit bar, surrounded by strangers and friends, the world faded away, leaving just the two of them in their own private bubble. Unable to resist any longer, Ben took Emma's hand and guided her out of the bar to a quieter, secluded area. They both knew this was a line they couldn't uncross, but in that moment, reason didn't matter. The connection they had been suppressing finally came to a head. In the stillness of the night, they looked at each other, and all the barriers they had built crumbled. Without another word, he leaned in, and their lips met in a kiss that felt like a release, an answer to the unspoken tension they had been carrying. It was electric, intense, and filled with a passion neither of them had ever experienced before. For a brief moment, the weight of their actions, the potential fallout, was forgotten. They were lost in each other, the culmination of months of hidden feelings and unresolved tension finally finding its release. But as the kiss ended, reality came crashing back. They pulled away, breathing heavily, both of them realizing the gravity of what they had just done. The guilt hit them instantly, a wave of shame and regret that neither could ignore. They stood there, unable to look at each other, the enormity of their actions settling in. "This can never happen again," Emma whispered, her voice shaking. Ben nodded, swallowing hard. They both knew the damage had already been done, and there was no going back. They agreed, silently, to never speak of it, to bury the memory of that night and carry on as if nothing had happened. But deep down, they both knew it would haunt them, a constant reminder of the line they had crossed, a secret they would have to carry in silence. In the days following that fateful night, Emma and Ben were left to grapple with a whirlwind of emotions: regret, guilt, longing, and a sense of dread that seemed to follow them at every turn. Each time they thought back to that night, the memory felt sharper, more vivid, pulling them in different directions. Both were aware that nothing could undo the kiss, and each carried it like an invisible weight that seemed to grow heavier by the day. For Emma, the hardest part was being around Sophie, who was as warm and trusting as ever. Emma felt a sickening guilt every time Sophie smiled at her or casually mentioned Ben, as if nothing had changed. Sophie, in her obliviousness, only seemed more determined to involve Emma in her life with Ben. There were nights when she'd plan couples outings or ask Emma for advice on planning special dinners for Ben, her confidence in Emma's loyalty and friendship unwavering. Emma's heart twisted each time she participated in these activities, feeling torn between the bond she cherished with Sophie and the magnetic pull she felt toward Ben. She tried to convince herself that the kiss was a mistake, a fleeting moment they could both forget. But as the days passed, she realized it was more than just a mistake. It was a crack in the foundation of her relationship with Sophie, and no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't ignore it. Ben wasn't faring any better. Whenever he was around Emma, he felt a tension that was both thrilling and unbearable. He tried to act normal, but he could feel the weight of his own duplicity every time he was with Sophie. She would reach for his hand, give him a knowing smile, and he would feel like a fraud, hiding something that was beginning to eat away at his conscience. He replayed the night in his mind constantly, torn between the regret he felt for betraying Sophie and the undeniable draw he felt toward Emma. Every time he saw her, he was reminded of how complicated his feelings had become, how this was no longer something he could brush aside as a one-time lapse in judgment. As the weeks went on, their secret became a ghost that haunted them both. They barely spoke to each other, and when they did, it was brief, tense, as if they were both afraid of reigniting the spark that had led them down this path. They avoided being alone together, each one of them knowing that even a passing touch or an innocent conversation could unravel the fragile control they were struggling to maintain. Yet, despite all their efforts, there were moments when their eyes would meet across a crowded room, a shared look that lingered just a second too long. In those moments, the carefully constructed walls they had built felt like they could crumble at any second. One evening, Sophie invited Emma and a few other friends to a small gathering at their house. It was a casual affair, meant to be a relaxed evening with friends, but for Emma and Ben, it felt like walking a tightrope. They both arrived, determined to keep their distance, to act as if nothing was amiss. Sophie was in her usual high spirits, laughing and chatting with everyone, blissfully unaware of the tension simmering beneath the surface. Emma tried to focus on Sophie, to remind herself of the friendship that meant so much to her, but every time she caught a glimpse of Ben, her resolve faltered. Ben, too, was struggling to keep up the facade. He forced himself to be present, to engage with friends and avoid looking in Emma's direction. But despite his best efforts, his attention kept drifting back to her, a magnetic pull he couldn't control. At one point, Sophie went to the kitchen to grab more snacks, leaving Emma and Ben momentarily alone in the living room. They both froze, caught in the awkwardness of the situation, the silence between them filled with unspoken words. Ben took a deep breath, his gaze drifting to Emma, a mixture of longing and guilt in his eyes. "Emma," he began, his voice low and filled with regret. "We have to find a way to move past this." She nodded, her eyes filled with a sadness he hadn't seen before. "I know, Ben, but I don't know how to make this disappear. I can't just pretend it never happened." Their voices were barely a whisper, both of them aware of the risk of being overheard, but unable to hold back their emotions any longer. Just as Ben was about to respond, Sophie returned, cheerfully placing the snacks on the table and asking what they were talking about. They both exchanged a quick, nervous glance before Emma quickly covered, saying they were just discussing plans for a group trip. Sophie, blissfully unaware, laughed and joined in, making suggestions for the trip. But beneath her lightheartedness, Emma and Ben felt the weight of their deception press down on them even harder. Then, one evening, the fragile balance they had maintained came crashing down. Ben's best friend Ryan had noticed the subtle tension between Emma and Ben, picking up on the fleeting glances and the uncomfortable silences that lingered when they were in the same room. Ryan, who had always been close with Sophie, began to piece together what was happening, his suspicions growing with each encounter. One night, after a few drinks, he confronted Ben, his tone accusatory, his words cutting through the thin veil of secrecy that Ben had tried so hard to maintain. "Ben, tell me the truth," Ryan demanded, his voice low but firm. "What's going on between you and Emma?" Ben was taken aback, the question hitting him like a punch to the gut. He tried to deny it, to brush off Ryan's accusations as unfounded, but Ryan wasn't convinced. His suspicions only grew stronger, and in a moment of anger, he warned Ben that if he didn't come clean, he would have no choice but to tell Sophie. Ben was left reeling, torn between his loyalty to Sophie, his friendship with Ryan, and the undeniable pull he felt toward Emma. Over the next few days, the tension between them all became unbearable. Emma was on edge, sensing that something was about to give, that the delicate balance they had tried so hard to maintain was about to come crashing down. She felt trapped, caught between her love for Sophie and the feelings she couldn't deny. She knew that if Ryan exposed their secret, it would destroy everything she held dear, but she couldn't bring herself to let go of Ben. The breaking point came during a dinner party at Sophie and Ben's house, an event that should have been a celebration but quickly turned into a night of hidden glances and simmering tension. As the evening wore on, Ryan's frustration grew, his patience finally snapping. In a tense, charged moment, he pulled Sophie aside, his face pale as he revealed the truth he had uncovered. Sophie's face crumpled, the shock and betrayal cutting through her like a knife. Ben and Emma watched in horror as Sophie's expression changed, a mix of disbelief and pain filling her eyes as she turned to face them. The room fell silent, the weight of the revelation crashing down around them like a wave. Sophie's voice shook as she confronted them, her words laced with heartbreak and anger. Emma felt her heart shatter, the realization of the pain she had caused overwhelming her. Ben reached out trying to explain, but the damage was done. Their secret was out, and there was no way to undo the hurt they had caused. In the weeks that followed, Sophie distanced herself from both of them, the betrayal too deep to forgive. The friendship they had shared was shattered, the trust that had once held them together broken beyond repair. Emma and Ben were left to pick up the pieces of their lives, haunted by the consequences of their actions, each one of them forever changed by the choices they had made. The love they had shared was a bittersweet memory, a reminder of the line they had crossed and the price they had paid for it. The aftermath of the revelation was a fractured silence that rippled through the lives of everyone involved. For Sophie, each day became a struggle to make sense of the betrayal, to reconcile the friend and husband she'd once trusted with the strangers they had become. She kept to herself, avoiding mutual friends and gatherings, wrapping herself in an isolating cocoon of shock and heartbreak. Sophie couldn't believe how quickly her life had unraveled. The vibrant love she had once felt for Ben had vanished, replaced by a deep sense of betrayal that pierced her with each passing thought. Ben attempted to reach out to Sophie, hoping for some path to forgiveness. He knew he had hurt her deeply, and although he had told himself it was only one kiss, the weight of his actions felt far heavier. He tried to imagine their life returning to normal, thinking maybe he could repair the cracks he had caused. But every time he saw the hurt in Sophie's eyes or sensed her hesitation around him, he knew he was fooling himself. Her trust in him had been shattered, and with it, their marriage had lost its foundation. Ben felt a profound sense of loss, grappling with the realization that he had single-handedly destroyed the life they'd built together. Emma was equally devastated. She'd lost not only her closest friend but a part of herself as well. The realization of what she'd done weighed on her, leaving her unable to look at herself in the mirror without feeling waves of regret. She tried calling Sophie, attempting to explain, but her calls went unanswered. Messages went unread, and Emma quickly realized that the damage was irreparable. She was left to face the hollow feeling that gnawed at her, a guilt that no apology could ever erase. Every memory with Sophie now felt tainted, the laughter they once shared eclipsed by the betrayal that had torn them apart. In the days that followed, Sophie confided in Ryan, the one person who had exposed the truth. Ryan became a shoulder for her to lean on, offering her a space to voice her pain, her anger, and her confusion. Ryan's support was unwavering, and while it pained him to see her suffer, he understood that this was a burden she needed to release. Their friendship grew stronger through shared conversations, late nights filled with moments of silence and reflection, as Sophie tried to find a way to heal. Ben, sensing the finality of Sophie's decision, struggled to come to terms with his own loneliness. He felt as though he had thrown away the most important relationships in his life. It was a truth he didn't want to face but could no longer deny. Friends started to pull away, his social circle becoming a distant memory of the life he had before. Every attempt he made to reconnect was met with silence or polite rejection. He knew he had to live with his choices, that the consequences were inescapable, a constant reminder of the lines he had crossed. Emma, left with a similar sense of isolation, found herself trying to rebuild her life alone. The social invitations stopped, and people she once called friends began avoiding her, their judgment a palpable shadow that seemed to follow her everywhere. She tried to fill her days with work, with hobbies, but there was no escaping the weight of her actions. Her attempts to reach out to Ben became sporadic, each message left unanswered, a silent acknowledgement that their bond was a catalyst that had brought nothing but heartache. Time moved on, and while the wounds never fully healed, they began to scar over. Sophie, with Ryan's support, gradually found herself able to embrace life again. She rediscovered her passions, finding solace in small moments, slowly rebuilding herself piece by piece. Ben, haunted by what he had lost, made the decision to move away, hoping a change of scenery might offer him a fresh start. He understood that he couldn't repair what he had broken, and with each passing day, he grew further from the life he once knew. For Emma, moving forward felt like an impossible task, but she too began the long journey of self-reflection, determined to find a way to make peace with her actions. The bond she had lost with Sophie would remain a part of her, a bittersweet memory that served as both a lesson and a reminder of the cost of crossed boundaries. In the end, their lives took separate paths, each marked by a profound change. The friendship that had once bound them was gone, a casualty of the choices they had made. They were left to pick up the pieces, to navigate the life-altering consequences of that one moment, forever shaped by the lessons learned in heartbreak and regret. As the final scene closes, we see each of them moving forward, carrying with them the memories of a time when everything was simpler and a reminder that some lines, once crossed, can never be undone.